Hello. Seems like I've joined the mediocre YouTuber club, being that I've now got my lav mic attached to some weird contraption that I hold. That's a thing we do now. So for those who saw my introduction video, you'll know that I've in the process of writing an urban fantasy novel by the name of Control. That is the first in a planned longer continuity I've got, and this is going to be a little two-part video thing that I'm going to do, basically just describing and talking about my planned continuity. If any of you are interested, or maybe perhaps come back to this video later in, if and when I am a successful author, to see how much this actually stuck and how much of it changed, or for me to look back on if I'm a complete failure. So the whole idea of a larger continuity has basically been a big part of sort of my creative ideas for a long time. I always wanted to have a load of kind of loosely connected stories in the same world, as it were. Not as in like your traditional high fantasy series, long running kind of stuff like Lord of the Rings or Wheel of Time or whatever. These are separate standalone stories, perhaps maybe one or two sequels or prequels here and there, but they all take place within the same world. But what is this world? Well, that's what this video is for. So this continuity takes place in a fictional world called Alterra, which basically mirrors the world that we live in, Earth, but slightly different, with enough similarities to make it recognizable with enough differences for creative liberties. While urban fantasy isn't really a new genre per se, there's plenty of great examples of it. In fact, I actually have. I'm going to read this recently. This is the Eric Carter series by Stephen Blackmore. This is a pretty good example of modern urban fantasy, that kind of stuff. If you like the movie Constantine with Keanu Reeves in it, or the graphic novel that Constantine's based off of, you will like this. It's a lot of dealing with demons and stuff and whatever. This not an advertisement for this, but the whole idea of an urban fantasy world that has the kind of story beats and the kind of the vibe and feel of high fantasy and the likes of Lord of the Rings, but in a modern technological setting, isn't really a thing that I myself have seen or witnessed, though I wanted to build that part in the market, if that part of the market exists. No one else has done it, so it probably doesn't. So I basically have a longer general continuity. You can think of it as like an anthology series, more or less, with loosely connected narratives and stories following different characters through different periods in history. So I've got the early stuff starting around kind of like 19th century, early 20th century, leading up to near-ish future, more or less. Bearing in mind I am going to be using the Gregorian calendar to refer to the timings and eras of these, even though this is a fictional world where the Gregorian calendar shouldn't make sense, but I'm using it anyway, because I can. If Stephen King can say that Hey Jude written by the Beatles is in his fictional gunslinger world, then I can use the Gregorian calendar in my fictional world. Fight me. So the whole idea of what was really tying all these stories together was just that they took place in the same world, but that link was tenuous and there wasn't really much to sort of tie them between. I just had a load of standalone story ideas that I just kind of wanted to shoehorn into them being in the same world, which didn't really make sense, to be honest. That was until I worked out the magic system. Now, I will be speaking more in depth on the magic system in the part 2 video, which will be coming out next week, so stay tuned for that if you're interested. But I'm just going to go into the more general planned continuity, as it were, and sort of the general history of the world that I've kind of crafted. A bit of world building I've done, so just for, purely self-indulgent purposes, because I can. I do feel I maybe need something a bit more ridiculous to put my mic on. It'll be funny. So my first novel, Control, is set kind of roughly in the past 20 years or so, technology-wise. You can think of it as maybe kind of like sort of roughly mid to late 2000s. That's kind of like roughly where I've put it. In my sort of reference document, I've got it as 2006, so you can think sort of like roughly technologically around there. And I have stuff leading all the way up to sort of past that to 2010, and then all the way up to the 2040s. That's just 2 novels beyond that point, and stuff leading all the way back to 1823. However, that one's a bit more of a not a fully developed idea. The earliest in sort of the general timeline continuity wise goes back to 1948, that being Ocean Flame, which I'll get into sort of the general plot ideas of that in a moment. So I'm going to go through kind of the my planned route for approaching these novels, these ideas in a way. I'm going to be talking about these novel ideas in the order of how I plan to write them. So Control is the first one written, and I'm going to go with the ones I'm planning to write after that. And again, this will probably be a fun one to sort of look back on to see if I actually follow this arbitrary schedule I've set for myself. So after Control, the next one I have planned is set back in the 90s, called Creep as the working title at the moment. It centers around a psychiatrist who is working as a school psychiatrist at this secondary school / community college in this small town in this mountainous region. And one of his subjects, what do you call them? Patients, that's the word I'm looking for, patient. But one of the students that he's trying to help, he finds that she's basically being haunted by spirits or somewhat. Only he can see them, and he can see how they are sort of sapping away her mental energy, almost, in a way. They kind of feed off the mental energy of others. They're not a wholly present entity in the rest of the Alterra continuity, but for this particular story, that's what they're very sort of pivotal to that. This is my hand at a more sort of like smaller, kind of character-driven, emotional sort of story idea I've had. One of the earliest ones I have, and like a lot of my ideas, it came from a weird dream I had. That's going to be a running thing. A lot of my story ideas come from weird dreams. I have a lot of weird dreams. I just realised I've just brushed completely past Control, so I have spoken about it in the introduction video, but for those who didn't see that video or just want another rundown, basically Control surrounds the story of a man called Brian Davidson, who is a depressed man in a dead-end office job, who is very much kind of on his sort of last legs mentally, in a very kind of like a cynical, depressed state of mind. But he then finds this amulet that gives him mind control powers, and basically then follows him, using that to take over the world in a very sort of spiteful manner. However, there is one girl called Alice who's immune to his influence. But anyway, back to Creep. So Creep is basically set in sort of the mid-90s in this fictional town called Ash Hall, surrounding a fictional body of water called Lake Asher. It's kind of a mountainous region, and within this place is Ash Hall College, where our main character, Nicholas Summers, is employed as a psychologist and counsellor, basically, for the school, for the students. However, Dr. Summers basically finds that one of his new sort of students he has to help out is the daughter of one of his close friends, Dr. Murdoch, who is also a teacher and employee at the college as well, and sort of basically uncovering a whole kind of conspiracy around why these demons are leeching off this one girl, off Dr. Murdoch's daughter, and sort of trying to work out something from like their superior, their boss and mentor, as it were, as if he has ulterior motives. Everyone knows that he's got ulterior motives. Still can't believe that's where they found that song. That is wild. Following on from there, I'm going to be a little less specifics on the details, because going into those details will spoil a lot of plot points I have planned for other novels, Control in particular. So if you want to save those spoilers for that one, then I'm going to be keeping sort of detail light and sort of why things are the way they are. But once all these are written and released, then you will know why. The next one is Beneath the Storm. This is set kind of in the not too distant future in a post-apocalyptic setting. Again, I won't reveal what caused the post-apocalyptic setting, just because that will, again, be spoilers, but just the basic vibe is just sort of your typical kind of post-apocalyptic survival story, basically. So I've got the idea of basically this initially starts following 3 separate plot points, 3 separate characters that basically come together and converge in the roughly the midpoint or to the third act of the story. Because I've always wanted to do a sort of post-apocalyptic survival story. I've been a big fan of that kind of vibe of things since I was very young, especially whole like zombie survival video games and that kind of stuff. And while this isn't a zombie apocalypse, this is sort of more in line with perhaps Cormac McCarthy's The Road, I suppose. Probably the closest thing you can say, closest comparison. This is another one that came from just a weird dream of mine. A lot of these are kind of a weird collation of other dreams. Did actually try writing this one about 10 years ago, when I was like 15, 16 years old, and didn't realise you could, plot and plan things out and structure and stuff. I just thought you just sat down at of paper and you just wrote it, which is why I never finished it, or rather, never got past like the 3rd chapter or something, so hopefully I can approach it better this time around. This one's I've got plans of being kind of like quite a harsh, brutal one, but also showing lots of signs of humanity deep down in the hardest parts of society and sort of the hardest times overall. Going back to the whole like planned magic system I have, which again I will go into more detail with in the next video. But just a little bit of detail so far is that magic is held within these artifacts, and basically once society has collapsed, these artifacts basically go and get all in the hands of the wrong people. So that's that. Going onwards from there, this is sort of either I'm going to do this one before Beneath the Storm or after Beneath the Storm, depending on, again, we'll see. This one is the one I mentioned earlier, Ocean Flame. This is set in a sort of a fisherman's village back in the late 1940s, and sort of the main POV character is kind of seen as a bit of a weakling. He's not respected, basically kind of put into slavery by his boat's captain, master of sorts. And again, sort of like conditions are very harsh and the people even harsher. However, the main pivotal point of this novel comes in the title, Ocean Flame. Like I said, the magic system relates to certain artifacts, and one particular artifact is known as the Ocean Flame, and this boat's captain is trying to find the Ocean Flame in order to gain himself an inordinate amount of power and basically become a bit of a tyrant. And it's our POV character, our protagonist's goal to basically stop him before he finds it and does terrible things with it, and sort of how he, despite being seen as a weakling, how he kind of finds his own strength and overpowers the rest of his crew. So yeah, kind of a seafaring, semi-revenge story, if that appeals to you. Jumping a bit forward again, we're kind of like late 70s, early 80s. I've got this one set in 1981. This one is under the working title Black Dirt. So this is the one that I kind of envisioned as closest to your traditional kind of high fantasy story structure and vibe, but in a relatively modern technological setting. The best way I can describe it is it's kind of like Lord of the Rings or that kind of high fantasy in the setting of Taxi Driver, basically the Martin Scorsese movie. So going back to the whole magical thing, it's basically there's a load of rebels who are acting as kind of a illegal magic users, because of course magic is a very powerful tool in this world, so it's very heavily regulated. However, there is a black market for artifacts, and these rebels basically use it for their own gain, or also kind of as a way of a bit of a freedom fighter, fight back against the power, loosely collated militia of sorts. And the main idea basically centers around, in the setting, is this fictional city called Harson, which is basically this world's version of kind of New York City. The mayor, or the man who's running to become mayor, a man called Magnus, is promising a lot of heavier restrictions on things and a lot of more like crackdown on crime and that kind of stuff, and sort of a restriction on kind of like freedoms and that kind of stuff. And while he's leading in the polls, a lot of our main characters, our main crew, is not a fan of that. So they basically take it upon themselves to try and take him down, in sort of the idea of trying to preserve freedom in a way. So they are kind of like morally grey, but they're a little bit self-serving here and there, but ultimately they're trying to fight against corruption and authoritarianism, basically, in principle. See, there's going to be sort of a wide range of characters. It's going to be typical like 5-man crew. You've got your main kind of like paragon hero, your sort of more morally grey foil, the brains, the brawn kind of thing. There is one of the members of that crew that has slightly different, shall we say, intentions regarding Magnus. So I'm not going to go too much into the detail on that one, because I'm very excited to write this one. I'm saving this one again for later. I'm writing the other ones first because I want to do this one justice the most, because probably one of the more ambitious ones. It's probably going to be quite a long one when it gets written, but hopefully it's decent enough. So kind of going into sort of like roughly kind of the general characters. It starts off with the two characters, Travis Foster and James McLaughlin. Travis is kind of quite skilled in various different magical disciplines, almost unnaturally so, but tends to be a little bit more on the self-serving side of things. And James is more on the kind of, he's more meek, but still ultimately more leaning into sort of altruistic in a way. Whereas you can think of it in sort of like D&D alignment. Travis is more kind of chaotic neutral, whereas James is more kind of true neutral, sort of leaning slightly more towards good. You then have Florian, who's sort of the main kind of like paragon type figure, who's very strongly moral. He's very religious and believes strongly about, again, sort of like morality and virtue and that kind of stuff, often to the chagrin of Travis, who's more of a just get the job done through whatever means kind of guy. And capping that off, we also have Arthur Hendrickson, who is basically both the brains and the brawn of the crew. He specializes in the magical disciplines that basically give you enhanced intelligence and enhanced strength. So, he can outsmart you and beat the ever-loving fuck out of you if you cross him. And the final two members is Ava Reinhardt and her dog, Flash. This is going to be a bit of a weirder one. Flash is a dog, but with human-level intelligence, using the same magic discipline that Arthur uses and other people use to enhance their own intelligence, if that makes any sense. So yeah, it's going a bit Scooby-Doo here, but I'm hoping I'm doing this justice. But Ava's sort of this younger girl who's sort of that more sprightly, sort of the younger member who sort of just brings a lot of life and optimism into the party, as opposed to the kind of quite grim and morally grey characters and the soup of dubiousness in this crew thus far, but the best I can do to describe it at the moment. But that is that one thus far. I also do have a planned direct prequel to Black Dirt, centering around Ava, who, when she was much younger, her uncle was a sort of a private detective, and you want to go more like private detective kind of vibes with that one. Quite a different story vibe, but sort of similar setting. That one's just more of a love letter to the Professor Layton games, because those games were my childhood and I just love a good old like detective story. Now there are other story ideas, and this video is running along long enough already, but I will just sort of brush over the later ones, because those are the ones I have most fleshed out at the moment, and I'll just sort of brush over some of the other ideas I have thus far past this point. So after Beneath the Storm, when society starts to rebuild, we have working title Abyss. This is set in kind of a distant but kind of like near enough-ish future in this sort of grand underground prison complex, and following several people basically trying to escape it while society's rebuilding itself, but as still kind of in a very draconian medieval methods of doing things. The two other ones is He Who Rides Horses and The Agent in the Tower, both of which are kind of more romance-driven plots, which again, they're not too well fleshed out in the moment, because romance I wouldn't say is really my strong suit, but these are stories that again came from like weird dreams of mine that I actually really want to tell. He Who Rides Horses is kind of like a western vibe one. It's set on this ranch in kind of America-esque plains, where this one girl is sort of left alone on her family's ranch to sort of maintain it, but there's a mysterious man known only as He Who Rides Horses who she sees off in the distance, and they begin a relationship, but also then there's other strange figures and people who keep appearing around on the ranch, so that's kind of a romance, ghost story, mystery kind of thing. Perhaps there might be a standalone thing outside of the continuity, maybe perhaps, but that's a novel idea I have. And The Angel in the Tower is kind of a similar thing, based kind of sort of roughly Victorian era, in this sort of larger state. One of the groundskeepers or sort of servants, this younger guy, goes into, there's this tower at the center of this labyrinth on these grounds of this palace basically, where there is a fallen angel within the tower, and basically takes it upon himself to nurse her back to health while also keeping her a secret, and a relationship between the two of them develops. And there's other like smaller ideas as well. I actually currently, in between drafts of Control, I am working on a sci-fi short story called A Tomb with an Exit, which deals with kind of Matrix-esque virtual reality kind of stuff, but I don't know if you've ever sort of the idea of, I think, like the pleasure cube or something, or some sort of philosophical idea of you get to go into this state, this pod of sorts, and you're basically given to basically just fulfill your wildest dreams through whatever virtual means, and to just never suffer again kind of stuff. And then there's like the whole moral dilemma with that kind of stuff, whether people would wish to do that, whether it's morally right to do that, and kind of the story's dealing with those ideas, and it's kind of centering around a journalist who goes into this world to find this one man who's chosen to basically relegate the rest of his life to this virtual world and why he's chosen to do that and abandon reality, essentially. So that's a shorter one, like 20,000 words max. Not sure what I'll do with that one, or if it's just like a writing exercise of mine, but we'll see how that one goes. And that's of course not even getting into the 5-part sci-fi series I have planned for the future. I just want to say, I don't know how long this video will be in total, but I'm already nearly 40 minutes of recorded footage here, so maybe I can cut this down, but this video is getting long enough as it is, so again, we'll just go over this sci-fi series I have planned, and then, again, if you want to learn more about the magic system I've got planned, then tune in next week for that video as well. So this one's set several centuries into the future. I'm calling it Nova Lectus, which is sort of like Latin that roughly translates to new reading or new bed. Bit weird, but in a kind of way of like, this is humanity needs a new home, or this is a new chapter on humanity's life. Basically, the earth is fucked, everyone's dying. So I'm going off kind of like not a immediate apocalypse thing. This is basically just a completely separate thing, not part of the Alterra continuity. Set in the kind of 28th, 29th century, where the world exists, humanity is living, but just think of like the absolute worst things that could happen, sort of global warming and climate change wise. Imagine just that happens. Humanity sort of lives on, but just kind of limping on, and basically kind of like starts off with the population of Earth has finally dipped below 1 billion, which is sort of, I think, roughly kind of 1,000 years after Earth's population became 1 billion. I think it was like in the year 1800, so it's kind of 1,000 years later, they've now dipped below. And it kind of mainly deals with a load of humans who just abandon Earth, basically, and go off to different planets and different worlds. It's my kind of idea of just sort of, it's my version of Star Wars or Star Trek, basically, kind of space opera wise. So like Earth is abandoned, more or less. It's a lost cause, and following these humans, these people who are trying to basically make a new life and make a new civilization for humanity on other worlds with other alien species and other stuff of the like. There's a 5-part series I've got planned, so 5 separate novels. I likely won't reach this one for at least a good while yet, but again, it's another one that's just comes from a load of really weird dreams I've had. Really weird. But if that kind of thing sounds appealing to you, you know, space travel, survival kind of stuff, then just keep a lookout for the next 10 years. Yeah, that's basically sort of like the planned Alterra continuity and the basically other story ideas, more or less, I've got planned thus far. Didn't cover absolutely everything, because some of it's not too fleshed out, and this has gone on long enough already, so do tune in next week for part 2, which will be me talking about the magic system. I have basically that ties these stories together, and I hope to see you then. See you later.